Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
It's Lindsay Smith Rogers. Today, the health and well-being of Ukrainian children. Dr. Irwin Redlener is a pediatrician and co-founder of the Ukraine Children's Action Project, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that all children in Ukraine have access to the vital resources they need to stay safe and secure in the face of war and devastation. He talks with me about how to assess and respond to needs for this population and why it's so critical to think about the well-being of youth in any difficult or dangerous circumstances, particularly when there may be competing priorities. Let's listen. Dr. Irwin Redlener, thanks so much for joining us on Public Health on Call. Would you tell us a bit about you and your work?
Yeah, sure. I'm a pediatrician by training, but I've been doing public health for essentially my entire career. And initially was setting up programs and practicing pediatrics in some very challenging environments. My first real job was running a clinic in the sixth poorest county in the U.S. in East Arkansas, where there was just rampant racism and extreme poverty and so on. And then I set up a program in New York with my wife and the singer Paul Simon called Children's Health Fund, and we developed a very large network of mobile pediatric clinics for homeless and medically underserved children. And my side gig has been I set up and ran the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University and spent a lot of time thinking about and responding to very, very large-scale disasters. So here I am now and working in Ukraine, and that's where we are.
That's where we are, and we're here today to talk about your work with the Ukraine Children's Action Project. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Right after the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine, a friend of ours who happens to be this iconic folk singer, Joan Baez, who actually bailed out the clinic I was running in East Arkansas in the early 1970s. We've been friends with her since. She was very concerned about the invasion. She drew a portrait of Zelensky, and she called up and said, this was a few weeks after the invasion, said, what can I do with this? It's really a beautiful oil painting that she did. I said, make prints, we'll sell them. She raised about $135,000. And so what do I do with the money? And my wife, Karen, who's been my partner since the beginning of my public health work, we actually went to Poland to see many of the refugee families who were streaming into Poland from Ukraine. And that's how we got hooked on it. And then we set up our own 501c3 organization, the Ukraine Children's Action Project. We've raised over $7 million since the full-scale invasion. We're supporting dozens of partners in Ukraine who are helping kids impacted by the war. We've been there 8 times. We just got back. And, it's a tragedy. It's really a very, I said to Karen this morning after reading another headline about another school being attacked by a Russian drone. And, it's like adults start wars and children die. One of the things about being a pediatrician, and Karen has been working in child development and children's issues, we're talking about 5 decades of doing this kind of work. And we've seen so many kids in trouble, including in Ukraine. And it's never their fault, obviously. It's something is happening around them. And in this case, in Ukraine, it's a war. So we're seeing really tragic consequences that are affecting kids and their well-being.
Coming in with a public health background and as a pediatrician, can you talk about what the priorities are for working with youth in a conflict zone like Ukraine?
Sure. Well, so it always for children in crisis, I'm talking about populations of children in crisis, whether it's because of extreme poverty, homelessness, disasters, or war. The first thing that happens to them is normalcy gets stolen from them. So what's normalcy? So what kids need is they need a stable, safe, secure home and home life, a loving environment. They need to be able to go to school, have friends, do their after school stuff, and basically allowed to grow and thrive, reach their potential. And here we are now with kids who are affected by war, and all of that gets stolen from them. So Our priorities have to do with three things, really. The medical impact. We've had around 3,000 to 3,500 children killed or injured in the war, and we're helping supplement medical services for children there. But the second thing is massive amount of psychological trauma. I mean, like unbelievable. At least 1.5 million kids in Ukraine that are suffering from long-term psychological trauma. And then the third thing is educational disruption. We have millions of children in Ukraine who have not been able to go to school regularly. And this is a major problem. And when the war is over and it's time for those for thinking about recovery of Ukraine, they're going to have to come up with ways in a very large scale manner doing catch up education so these kids don't fall behind. So the whole future of the country is wrapped up in trying to make sure that their psychological needs are cared for, they're in a secure environment, and that they're back in school. And, before the war, Lindsay, the schools were closed for a school year because of COVID. So we see 8, 9-year-olds who've rarely been in a regular school environment, which is devastating for their future education, as you can imagine.
Let's just take the example of establishing normalcy on a broad scale while the conflict is still ongoing. What does that look like right now?
That's really a great question. And I rarely get asked that. And I should be asked that more because I state the obvious that normalcy is critical for appropriate child development. So, what do you do in a war or in a post disaster situation? We do the best we can. We get as close as possible, starting with making sure kids are in a safe environment to the extent that that is possible. So, we move kids away from the front, children and families, away from the frontline communities, and then we have to relocate them. In this case, sometimes it's been out of the country, and sometimes it's been to the western part of Ukraine. The second thing is that we want to make sure that the children who need it are getting appropriate psychological support. So one of the things is we support a program that does a lot of work in the sort of rapid assessment of children for psychological issues and then refers them as needed. And that has to be scaled up. So in order to scale up, we work with various ministries of government. We say, look, here's a program that works. How do we make it available not for 1,000 kids, but for 100,000 children? And then finally, the catch-up education. And for that, there are certainly programs, including digital learning centers, that can help kids who aren't able to go to a classroom, but at least able to learn online. And it's not easy, but it's better than nothing in a very literal sense. So it's finding good programs, making sure they work. We demand an unbelievable amount of accountability of the programs we're supporting. And then when we have a program that works, we try to advocate to figure out ways of expanding the working model to reach much larger numbers of children. And by doing all this at the same time, we get closer to a state of normalcy for kids. And it's funny, it's not a menu. It's not like you could do healthcare and not education, or education and not mental health. Like it or not, you have to do all of it at once. And that, of course, is incredibly challenging.
One of my next questions, which you sort of answered, was going to be around, this sounds like a massive collaborative effort. You've got to get all kinds of people involved in something like this, whether it's these different organizations, whether it's politicians, civilians. Yeah. How do you prioritize this work in something like an ongoing state of emergency, right? When there are so many things going on and so many things that the general population needs, how do you sort of carve out a space for focusing on youth?
This is incredibly important question also, because it's very easy for the people that are functioning or planning to function during a conflict like this or during a major disaster to put the children's needs aside. We'll get to them later, which of course they never do. So the job of advocates is to keep pressing. No, we can't wait on children. They actually need our attention right now. And that just requires vocal advocacy. It's one of the reasons I was very anxious to speak to you, because this is part of the agenda. We can't, kids can't wait. It's kind of a little meme thing there. But the fact of the matter is that they can't wait. And hard as it is, we do have to focus on them, no matter how severe the crisis is, and that's what we're trying to do.
So, what do you see happening next? You said you just got back from Ukraine. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening now? We're several years into this. What's the state of things?
Yeah, it'll be 4 years since the full-scale invasion in February of 26. 4 years, which is almost as long as World War II was. And, the one thing about Ukraine is it's an extraordinary country. I knew zero about it before we went there for the first time. But the people are amazing. The culture is fantastic. They're brilliant in technology and the sciences. And the most important thing is they are a thriving democracy. But we are, as you say, we're at a very, very weird state of long exposure to war for these children. So that's where we are now. We have to figure out how to sustain the energy of the children who are suffering as a result of the war. And we just keep going there. We keep talking about it. And there are other people, of course, besides us, who are pushing for the same thing, including, by the way, politicians from both sides of the aisle in Washington. Plenty of Republicans as well as Democrats who think that Ukraine deserves our support. And in the meantime, we're waiting for a broken political system in the United States to get its act together to do the right thing here. But I guess we're struggling in general to find that. I don't mean to veer off into politics, but it's unavoidable, Lindsay. This is reality that we have to deal with.
You've been doing this work for a long time in different contexts, and you've said already that the children's needs tend to be kind of put to the side, and even when they are addressed, it might first be basic things like food, shelter, stuff like that. The other things like education and
Mental health and
mental health, that all of that seems to be a longer game. In some of these other contexts, have you seen how things have played out, and does that give you hope for what's happening with Ukraine? Like, do you think that there is enough momentum here to kind of sustain these efforts?
Well, there's two things at play. One is the war has to stop. So there's the immediate questions of an ongoing war, continued bombardments all over the country from drones and missiles sent by Russia, and that is a problem that has to be solved. We have to get the war stopped. The question is, what do we do in the meantime? Which is really, what we do is in the meantime work, and so that kids don't fall farther behind, that they're not trying to deal with extraordinary mental health and psychological trauma for 4 years. That's unsustainable. And one thing I would say in terms of our experience all over the world and including in the US is that kids at the end of the day are definitely resilient. They can bounce back, but you have to give them an exit ramp from the trauma that they're experiencing. It's doable. And we see kids that are absolutely remarkable. I wish I could take everybody with me. And we have these clips of these children who are just kind of happy and trying to make it and responsive to people that are trying to help them. And it's pretty amazing. And it's also very energizing for the people that are actually helping them. This is a constantly rewarding work that we're doing, even though there's obviously a big tragedy going on here. But yeah, so this is what we think. We think we're on the right track, but we have to get the war to end.
Last question for you. So you've been doing this work with the Ukraine Children's Action Project, but obviously we're kind of in a time where I've heard it called a polycrisis time. Are there other areas of the world that have your attention right now?
My attention is always elsewhere. On Monday of this week, there was a front page story in one of the New York newspapers about 154,000 homeless and migrant children in New York City alone who are not going to school regularly. And you pick up a newspaper, and that's where your mind is. It's in South Sudan, it's in Gaza, it's in so many places around the world where children are left to kind of pick up the crumbs after we're trying to deal with all the other aspects of a problem. And that is a fundamental problem for society. If we let children be in the last car in the train, that is devastating for the future of that society. We can't do that. They are the substrate of what will make the next generation strong and capable and getting over the problems that we're having. So yeah, and people are always asking me, what are you going to do about the 4 million kids who are starving in Sudan, or the millions of people suffering in Gaza? All legitimate questions, but it's Karen and me are this organization. We have somebody running our regional office in Lviv, Ukraine, but we have to focus. We have to focus. That doesn't mean my eye is off all the other crises, all the polycrises. Polycrises. I like that. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Irwin Redlener, thank you so much for talking to us about this situation, and we are eager to learn more.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Michael Bonfils, Spencer Greer, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production coordination by Catherine Ricardo. Analytics by Elisa Rosen. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.